The functional relationships, so cortex sending motor signals, limbic, emotional, behavioral signals, and also cognitive and associative learning signals. When the information is received in the striatum of the basal ganglia, striatum is working as an integrator, so it processes the information, and through the direct and indirect pathways, the information is sent to thalamus, so that will either increase the information or decrease information, and then thalamus sends the cortex, and cortex will respond, and then you will have changes in the behavior or the motor activity. It depends on the type of response that was initially sent. There's different types of circuits there in the basal ganglia. One is the motor circuit. Motor circuit is for motor activity that when you learn it, and then the motor circuit is taking over, and that become more like a reflex. But initially, when you're trying to do things, you're trying to learn something or build a habit, these are not reflexes, so you have to think about it. So that's why the cortex of the brain is involved. And neurotransmitter for that is dopamine, and dopamine is a reward system. So any activity that you do is as you learn more, and that's part of the reward. But as those skills and habits improve, then you think less about that, and that is changing and becoming the motor circuit, becoming more a reflex than actually thinking about it. So for this pathway, you have a different motor part of the frontal lobe and also sensory part of the parietal lobe. Both of them are involved, and they are sending signals to putamen. So this is the input in putamen, and the output of the putamen is through the direct and indirect pathways to the thalamus. And then that VL, ventral anterior and ventral lateral part of the thalamus activated, and that sends signals back to the motor area of the cortex of the brain, and then signals are sent down through the corticospinal pathway. Specific part of the motor circuit is oculomotor pathway, and this is frontal eye field, and that's located in the anterior, in the frontal lobe, if you remember it, and that sends signal to the caudate nucleus, and also here the parietal lobe is also important for the visual, because it's connected to visual association area. So that is also sending signals to the caudate nucleus, and now caudate nucleus can send information to the thalamus through the ventral anterior and dorsal medial. Ventral anterior sends signal back to the frontal eye field, and that's important for movement of the eye, for the gaze activities. Caudate nucleus also sends signals to the midbrain and substantia nigra area. There is a connection between substantia nigra and thalamus, as we saw it before, and also substantia nigra sends signal to the superior colliculus, which will cause inhibition of some of the reflexes or visual reflexes. Cognitive circuit is more for complicated movements. So when you are trying to learn something or doing some kind of activities, this is where the cognitive circuit is working. So this is initially before the motor circuit take over. This is for planning complex motor activity, and also for prioritizing higher brain functions. So as you do different activities, your experience and learning will improve, and that will change your attention. So that will affect your salience or attention to different stimuli. And based on that salience, then you have a different behavioral response to different kind of activity. So that's why everybody's behavior is different because of their previous learning status and previous skills and learning. For this cognitive circuit, different parts of the brain, as you can see, the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe, these are all association areas. They are connected to the caudate nucleus and also nucleus accumbens. And nucleus accumbens is carrying, the dopaminergic, so this is part of the limbic system, and this is connected to the thalamus, or ventral anterior nucleus, sends back information to the frontal lobe, and centromedian is sending information to the most of the cortex back, communicating with the most of the cortex of the brain, and so this activating different parts of the cortex. But VA is specifically to the frontal lobe. And there's also the motor, it's not shown here. You can draw another arrow if you want. It's not just the prefrontal lobe, but also the motor area of the frontal lobe is also activated back. And also there's a connection with the substantia nigra again because of the direct and indirect pathway that we were talking about. Substantia nigra has effect on the output of the thalamus. The limbic system is important for a lot of different functions, for emotional response, feeling, mood, motivation, reward, everything. So there's a lot of different memory also. There's a lot of different functions there, and as you can see, the nucleus accumbens and the ventral part of the striatum. So it's not shown here in this image. You can also add that. So the ventral part of the striatum receive information from the cingulate gyrus. This is the cingulate gyrus. This is the orbitofrontal gyrus. So information receiving from that is information is receiving from the frontal lobe, especially from prefrontal area, also from the amygdala and the hippocampus. So these areas receive information. You can also add another one here if you want, the subthalamic nucleus. So there's 3 different areas that are receiving information in the limbic circuit. One is the nucleus accumbens, the other one is the ventral striatum, and the third one is the subthalamic nucleus. So these 3 areas are receiving information, and then information is sent back to the thalamus through the ventral anterior, and the ventral anterior is important connection to the anterior cingulate gyrus and also orbitofrontal lobe through the thalamocortical pathway. And the dorsomedial is connecting with the other parts of the brain, especially the frontal lobe. The posture, gesture, and facial expression are important part of the limbic circuit, and dopamine is the neurotransmitter responsible for these kind of movements.
Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing to the channel.